Letters to a Young Therapist, Part 2, Spring. Chapter 7, Pain. March 23rd. Dear Laura, Jim and I just returned from our annual trip to see the migrating sandhill cranes. It was a cold, drizzly trip. Except for the occasional blaze of forsythia, Nebraska was dressed in earth tones: oyster, brown, tan, and gray. Most people would complain about that weather, but I hold that there is no bad weather, just bad clothes. I enjoy the earth in all her costumes. By yesterday there were 500,000 cranes roosting on the Platte River. As a species, they are almost as old as the Rocky Mountains. They flew over Nebraska when it was an inland sea. During the day, the cranes dance in the cornfields. At sunset, thousands wheel onto the Platte, forming their own dark islands in the quiet river. They trill a call, which naturalist Paul Groucho described as the sound of something you heard before you were born. I find comfort in observing their ancient rituals. They put my little life in perspective. Instead of making me feel insignificant, they make me feel like a small part of something infinite. Right now, you are working with several traumatized clients, and I encourage you to go see the cranes as a way to relax. Years ago, I worked with a client named Lorena. She was a social worker who loved to sing and dance to folk music. A single mother, she lived with her 3 kids in one of our poorest neighborhoods. I saw her during what she called the Year of the Locusts. Her youngest daughter had a seizure at school and was diagnosed with epilepsy. She lost her closest friend to breast cancer, and her dad died of a heart attack while trying to catch the bus. The first time I saw her, all she could do was cry. Then at the end of our session, she dried her tears, thanked me, and said, "I thought I wanted to come. I needed to come." For a time, sorrow overwhelmed Lorena. As she put it, she trudged through a gray tapioca fog. But she was a strong woman, and she gradually learned to accept all her feelings rather than run from them. Many people have years of tough times. I remember talking to a young Kurdish refugee about her work. Her back and shoulders ached from long days in a cold, slippery locker at a meatpacking plant. I said something about this not being an easy time for her. Jabha replied, "Never in my life have I had one day that was easy." In Another Country, I wrote about Alma, aged 82, widowed, going deaf, almost blind from diabetes. She lived with her profoundly intellectually disabled 60-year-old daughter in a small house. But Alma cheerfully did what needed to be done. She made friends with her postman, neighbors, and visiting nurses. She played practical jokes on her family and even on me when I stopped by. It was actually the first time anyone had ever put a whoopee cushion on my chair. Still, Alma feared what would happen to her daughter if she died first. If you are paying attention to the world, you see a lot of pain. I remember the tear-stained faces of 2 clients who on the surface couldn't have been more different from each other. Francesca was in therapy after a brutal date rape. Sue Ann came because her husband had just killed himself. Francesca was a beautiful dark-haired woman who ran the admissions program at a local university. Sophisticated and articulate, she could process her pain almost without my help. Sue Ann was an extroverted redhead who answered telephones for a living. By nature, she was a smart aleck, unaccustomed to discussing her private feelings. For months, I saw Sue Ann every Tuesday at 3, followed by Francesca at 4. In their sessions, they did much the same things. They cried, they raged, they worried about their kids. I will never forget Francesca's description of being thrown into a cement wall, having her teeth broken, of feeling cold and ready to die. I won't forget Sue Ann's account of telling her 5-year-old twins that their father was dead. One of them asked, "But he'll come home tomorrow, right?" Sue Ann and Francesca carried great burdens into my office, but like Alma, they made the best of their fates. In the end, they discovered that the terrible events had changed them forever, in sad ways, but in good ways too. Francesca learned she was stronger than she thought. If you can survive life, you can survive anything, she admitted. Sue Ann realized that she wasn't to blame for her husband's death, that whatever her failings were as a wife, ultimately her husband was responsible for his choices. And she discovered that sharing her feelings made them easier to bear. She left therapy a long time ago. I hope she remembers that lesson. Most of the craziness in the world, violence, addictions, and frenetic activity, comes from running from pain. Many of the world's biggest bullies and worst mass murderers have acted to avoid confronting their own painful feelings. The only thing worse than feeling pain is not feeling pain. Healthy people face their pain. When they are sad, they cry. When they are angry, they acknowledge they are angry. They don't pretend to have only PG-rated feelings. They don't judge their feelings. Rather, they simply observe and describe them. Of course, it isn't quite that simple. I have seen clients I simply could not comfort. For several months, I worked with a woman who had been orphaned when she was very young. She desperately wanted nurturance, but she was so prickly that I could never make it through the hour without offending her. She left with all her pain undigested, angry with me for being one more person who let her down. My definition of a healthy person is one who can grow and learn from all experiences. As an old man who had lost his wife, a son, and a daughter, poet Robert Frost said that he could sum up everything he knew about life in 3 words: it goes on. My hero is my Aunt Grace, who was in her 80s with an ill husband when her son died while mowing her lawn. By the time I called her, she had already organized herself mentally. She told me, "We'll just have to love and take care of the ones who are left." Laura, this is not to say that the learning justifies the suffering. My heart ached for Lorena, Francesca, and Sue Ann, but helped by tincture of time, they all found what they needed to heal. I hope this letter inspires you to go see the cranes. Standing on the bridge as the cranes settled in, we shivered and stomped our feet to fight the chill. After a tangerine sunset, a half moon shone down on the Platte, its reflection spotlighting the black island of birds. The wind blew through the cottonwoods. We listened as the cranes tucked each other in with their soft murmuring. Our faces ached with the cold, but later, driving home in our warm car, sharing cheese sandwiches and apples, we felt happy, whole, and reconnected to Mother Earth. Chapter 8, Happiness, April 14th. Dear Laura, April is my favorite time to visit the Ozarks. The morel mushrooms are sprouting, the bass are biting, and the pink and white dogwoods cover the hills like giant gumdrops. As always, I spend Saturday night at the Oldfield Opry. This is a free show, housed in its own auditorium, that features old-fashioned country music, cornball comedy, and clog dancers aged 5 to 95. Family and friends of the musicians serve the crowds chili dogs, chips, and the best raisin pie in the nation. My cousin Steve is a founding member of the Opry, which has been going on for years. His close friend Johnny Walker sings and tells jokes, many of them about my cousin, whom he calls Smilin' Steve. Johnny and Steve played together in rock and roll bands 30 years ago in high school. Johnny has a degenerative disease and is now on oxygen, almost blind and paralyzed from the neck down. He spends a great deal of time in the hospital battling respiratory infections, but whenever he can make it, Johnny is on the Opry stage. His dad dresses him in his country western clothes and cowboy boots and helps the musicians carry him to his chair. Johnny welcomes the crowd and emcees the event. Unable to move and losing his speech, Johnny has built a life that centers on music, but also involves a kind of Ozark Mountain counseling. Many people come by his house to talk. They leave feeling better, thinking that if Johnny can cheerfully handle his life, surely they can buck up and cope with theirs. Johnny is living proof of what research shows. Happiness bears almost no relationship to good fortune. Rich people are not happier than poor ones. We humans tend to maintain a set point of happiness, staying at about the same level of happy or sad, regardless of circumstances. Winning the lottery or having a cancer diagnosis changes this happiness quotient for only a very short time. As my Uncle Otis puts it, most people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. Research documents that the more time people spend with other people, the better they feel. Friends play a critical role in well-being. Surprisingly, men and women are equally happy. On the surface, this finding contradicts research that shows women report more depression. However, women also report more joy. They are more intense than men about all of their emotional states. As a group, married people are happier than single ones. Religious people are happier than non-religious ones, and people working toward goals report greater happiness than drifters. In fact, people enjoy the process of working toward goals even more than they do reaching them. Freud once described a man as wrecked by success. I've noticed a funny kind of sorrow and emptiness in people who have met all their goals. Unless they can redefine new goals that are meaningful to them, they are lost. I often suggest to depressed clients that they volunteer at a soup kitchen. They perk up and feel luckier. I once arranged for a rebellious, lonely teenage girl to work at a rest home. Garnet was too stubborn to assist the cooperative patients the nurses recommended. Instead, she chose Mr. Bottler, a mean-spirited and cantankerous octogenarian. For several weeks, Garnet assaulted him with her idiosyncratic methods of bonding, loud MTV viewing, offers to paint his fingernails black, gifts of Rolling Stone magazines, and her favorite food, peanut butter and dill pickle roll-ups. At first, the old guy begged the nurses to get rid of her. They tried, but Garnet kept slipping in. Finally, after a battle of the titans, Mr. Bottler caved and talked to Garnet. She talked back, and almost in spite of themselves, the two became friends. My work was just beginning with Garnet, but this victory was a start. One of the best things we can do for clients is encourage them to develop a good set of routines. These could include activities such as meditation, massages, and exercise, walking the family beagle, buying a cup of coffee on the way to work, lunch by a fountain, reading a good book, a weekly jog with friends, a monthly visit to grandparents, a yearly reunion with old teammates, or a backpacking trip to the mountains. These rituals give people something to anticipate. Ted Kuzer's book, Local Wonders, begins with an old Bohemian proverb: "When God wishes to rejoice the heart of a poor man, he makes him lose his donkey and find it again." Satisfying lives are about much more than the absence of tragedy. They are about appreciating what we have. Poet Bill Clough-Corn says, "Happiness is what finds you when you are loafing up to your potential." There are many kinds of love. It's important to love more than one person, and to have good friends and close connections to neighbors, family, and friends. I caution, don't have just one hobby or way of making a living. Like a good stock portfolio, be diversified. Happiness comes from making good choices. Integrity, energy, perseverance, and courage all contribute. In short, happiness is related to character structure, work, health, and relationships. Laura, most people might read this and say, I know that already. But in fact, our culture constantly misleads us about happiness, and we psychologists have sometimes been a part of the miseducation. Especially in the 1960s and 1970s, therapists encouraged a shallow definition of happiness that was essentially, you'll be happy if you do your own thing. Now we can be counterculture and recommend that clients seek contentment, an underappreciated goal, rather than bliss. Although bliss is great when you can get it, contentment is more achievable. We can suggest ancient pleasures, stories around fires, shared meals, good books, and beautiful music, whether it's African drums or Bach concertos. When I think about happiness, I imagine Johnny Walker all dressed up on the Opry stage, temporarily off his oxygen, but with his shiny canister nearby. He is poking fun at Steve and has the crowd and the musicians laughing. He is delicately soliciting donations for people whose houses have burned down. He is delicately soliciting donations for people whose houses have burned down or who have sick kids and no health insurance. I picture him with his eyes shut, nodding his head and smiling to Orange Blossom Special, and afterward smacking his lips as his mother feeds him a piece of homemade raisin pie.